Test, test.
Yeah, I'm just not gonna, I won't entertain any public yeah, I'm gonna make it very clear up front. If you wanna comment on this one, do it now, because then when we go to our work session, it's gonna be a free-flowing, try not, yeah, not, All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of 8 September 2025. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franciac, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Fantini.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hebeck.
Here.
Thank you.
Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, announcements and committee reports start us off, and I've got a few announcements. Just a reminder, so tomorrow is September 9th, so we've got a couple of events. Skagit County Department of Emergency Management and its partners are hosting several open houses. One of them will be right here in council chambers, and that is from 6:30 to 8:30. Again, this is for the county to take public input on proposed mitigation actions to be included in the 2025 Hazard Mitigation Plan. So also the same evening, same time, so I know that conflicts with the number of council members, but North Star Housing Forum, that will be hosted by North Star, Building Our Future from Housing Crisis to Thriving Community, and that'll be 6 to 8 p.m. in the Mount Vernon Library Commons. This is a registration required event. Space is limited, so hopefully if you haven't already registered, there's a chance to go on the northstarskagit.org website. I've made these announcements a few times. September 13th, this Saturday, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, starting with residential cleanup, 9 to noon. That's the ops facility, opportunity to do your fall cleanup. Be sure to bring proof of residency, so that's a free garbage drop-off. Senior Resource Fair, that's also Saturday the 13th, and that's from 10 to 2. And I've talked about that, so it should be a great time there. And then Fidalgo Bay Day is 11 to 3, and that's at the Fidalgo Samish Nation's Fidalgo Bay Resort, located 4701 Fidalgo Bay Road, and that's 11 to 3. So if you plan your day right, you can hit them all. And then finally, Sunday, Anacortes Schools Foundation and H.F. Sinclair are partnering for the Fueling Education Fund Run. That's Sunday, 8:30 to 11 at Washington Park. That's all the announcements that I have, and we'll go to committee reports. I believe the Housing Affordability Community Service Committee was postponed, and so I'll go on to the Planning Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The Planning Committee met at 5 p.m. Council members Walters and Cleland McGrath, and Planning Manager Libby Grage and Planning Director John Coleman. We talked about the development review process report that the city's consultant Matrix has been working on, and that will be presented to council and the public soon. The process for that was multi-layered, and part of it included interviewing people who've applied for permits. They also reviewed the code, our code and processes, and they're making best practices recommendations that the staff will sort of refine specifically to our needs and then implement. We talked a little bit about SmartGov as well, and some of the challenges that that software has provided us, and different ways to continue to work on those to improve processes. And we learned that we'll have a new permit coordinator starting in late September. And in October, we will go back to having the planning counter open on Fridays again. So it'll be, currently it's Mondays through Thursdays, but it will be Mondays through Fridays once again, once the permit coordinator is trained, and everything will be back up to normal. Also looking at potentially instituting appointments for people that will make it easier than just showing up and hoping you get to talk to someone. So just continuing to work on improvements to make it easier for staff and the public. Thanks.
Questions for Planning Committee?
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young?
Thank you. That sounds great. Do we have any sort of ballpark when that draft may be brought forward so we can take a peek at it?
Yes,
Thank you.
that will be, yes, within the next month, it will be coming forward. Yes, thank you.
All right, anything else for planning? Okay, Personnel Committee.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini.
The the Personnel Committee met on Thursday, September 4th. It was council members Anthony Young, Christine Cleveland McGrath, and myself, along with Director Kendall Moyle and Chief Floyd. And you were there too, weren't you? No, you missed that. Okay, no worries. Sorry. It's on here, so. Also, we got a recruiting update. We've had 6 total hires in the month of August, 3 park seasonals, 3 student rec assistants. We also had 8 exits in total. 7 of those were for seasonal positions, so we would expect them, obviously, to exit eventually. There's 4 active job openings right now, an equipment mechanic, a park maintenance technician, and they're currently interviewing candidates for that. Also, for firefighter paramedic, there's 2 openings with 2 contingent offers made, so we might be seeing full staffing here very soon. And for police officer, there's 2 openings with 3 contingent offers made, and that would bring us to full staffing, so we might see a fully staffed public safety here pretty soon. We also had some conversation around police overtime. It was something that those of us on the committee wanted to learn a little bit more about, and I appreciate the chief kind of laying out where those costs are and the reimbursements, and I think it might also be a good idea for the rest of council to possibly get an email breaking that down so that they can be apprised of that as well.
Questions for Personnel Committee? Any other announcements or committee reports I may have missed? Okay, we are on to public comment.
Mayor Miller?
Oh, yeah, Mr. Fantini.
I apologize.
No, that's okay.
2 quick things. First, AMP Fest was this past weekend. I saw Council Member Moulton there, and it was fantastic, super family-friendly, tons of great bands. If you didn't have a chance to attend this year, you can always attend next year, because I'm sure it'll come around again. That's all. Thanks.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Just to give a little bit more context for the public safety, or not public safety, the personnel meeting with regards to police overtime. I thought it was interesting. We didn't really have any kind of scope of what that overtime looked like and the types of reimbursements that were typically seen year to year. So just as kind of rough estimates, we saw about expenditures be 150, I think is what's 150,000 is what's budgeted each year in our budget. In 20 through the year of 2025, we're expecting it to be about 168,000. 2024 was similar. So, and then while we kind of just expect it because we always have either people out or on vacation or sick leave or parental leave or we have openings, there's always going to be overtime required. One of our discussion points was the fact that when we are fully staffed, will we see that number go down? And chances are no, because we will just have more people on shift. So when we're talking about fully shift or fully staffed, when we finally are at that point, we will see the swing shift have 3 people, day shift have 3 people, and night shift have 3 people. Currently, day shift, because there's other people that are available, in the police department if something goes wrong. A lot of times that drops down to 2 people currently. We wanted to talk about, and also we will see a lot higher number of overlap when we're fully staffed. So I think that's really important for us. We kept, when we were going through the levy, the public safety levy, we had real concerns about making sure if there was an emergency, we actually had police officers that would be able to respond in a timely manner. And we are getting to that point, and that's really exciting, especially when the introduction of a police boat was introduced, knowing that we would still be fully staffed during the day when that was in the mix. As a point of interest, when we looked at reimbursements, and they can be anywhere from the oyster run, which I think LTAC provided $10,000 last year for, for additional staffing. It's the high school, when they're having football games, require additional staffing and reimburse us. When the refineries need additional shutdowns and they just need traffic assistance. There's a lot of things like that that runs through our city but is reimbursed by a third party. We also have, Island County does reimbursements for us when it comes to Stone Garden, State Patrol, when they're doing drug recognition. When we have our drug recognition expert, when there's someone in the county that there's a call out that says, hey, we need a drug recognition expert, we have one really incredibly highly trained officer. And that officer, if he's available to go and do that, he will go out and do that, not just in Anacortes, but throughout the county, and then we're reimbursed for that. So I think it's nice to have that context. And then also the Traffic Safety Commission is another one that reimburses us, whether they're doing kind of an emphasis on drunk driving, distracted driving, et cetera. So in 2024, that was about $47,000 of reimbursement out of that $160,000. And then 2025, we're only halfway through, and it's been about $23,000. So it appears we're on track. So just as a point of interest when we're talking about overtime, that is doesn't cover all of it, obviously, but it covers a portion of it, and it's an important component of our community and provided by our police officers.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young?
No, I just wanted to add, what this should show you is how closely we are looking at how money is spent. We're just looking to see, can we save money? Are we being efficient? And one of the good things about conversations like this, as in depth as they might be, is that it gives us both a chance to learn about reimbursement. It gives the chief and any other department heads a great chance to show us how not only they're being frugal with the dollars, but they're getting maximum use out of those dollars. So that was the outcome of this meeting, and I found it very fruitful, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the participation level, because it brought a higher level of clarity to what we're doing, and it also helped to bring just how those dollars are being spent and how we're saving dollars. So, anyway, thank you.
All right. Any other announcements or committee reports? Okay, next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public wishes to address the council on anything, and I'll say anything because I want to particularly point out that item 6A, which is a council procedures and committee workshop, if you're going to comment on that, now is the time to do that, because we're going to, after we finish up with the consent agenda, we're going to go down there and we're going to have a little more of a free-form conversation, or council's going to have more of a free-form conversation to go through some of the council procedures and committee structure. So again, you can come on up. I didn't have anybody signed up, but I'm still taking, council still take your comments.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. I'm Pat Gardner, Anacortes. That brought to attention what you about your meeting that you're going to have later. I would like to attend some of these different committee meetings in person that are open to the public. And I understand they're on your website, but I also know that they change towards the last minute. And is there some way, would that be put on your website so that before I go, I can check to make sure it's then and hasn't been postponed for another week or a couple days? Does it get changed on their website?
It is certainly possible that we can do that.
I would appreciate it because I think I'm going to start coming to some. Thank you.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Not on every committee, but I actually don't think that they change. Sometimes they are canceled. So for instance, our HACS committee last week was canceled, but I don't actually think they change very often or hardly at all.
That is. Okay, anybody else before we move on to our consent agenda? Okay, council, item 5A, B, C, D, and E, consent agenda.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. McDougall.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. McDougall and a second by Mr. Young to approve the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we are going to move other business, which is 6A. It's the City Council Procedures and Committee Structure Workshop. And we're going to try to do this like a real workshop. So we're going to gather around. We've got all of the directors, save one that had a conflict. And we'll sit around the table. Ms. Shu and Ms. Darcy will help move it along from the staff. And we'll try to hopefully have a good conversation.
Yeah. If we can, yeah, I think it'd be a really good idea, and it's just to help with the conversation, if we can have council members and staff intermingled, so we're not kind of on different sides. So can we have some council members? Anthony, can you come over here? Oh. We're just trying to. Or Christine, do you want to sit here? We're just trying to intermingle, that's all. Perfect.
I'm not sure workshop meant you get snacks, but maybe for next time. All right, whenever everybody ready? Okay.
So appreciate the opportunity for us to sit down in this format and have a conversation as it regards to the council procedures. This is a continuation of conversations that we've had started during the council retreat and then again in a meeting in July with the idea that this would make a lot of sense for us to sit down as in a public setting and have this conversation. So Ms. Swetnam and I have been, after the July City Council meeting, there was an understanding that council members would bring forth any questions or comments or feedback about the current council procedures, which includes the committee structure. And Ms. Swetnam and I put together just a compilation of that document, of what we had received from council members that was included in the council packet. In addition, just to be complementary to that, we put together a PowerPoint presentation. It's not intended to, and I have copies if you want to just pass around, just because I know we're in a little bit of a...
Yeah, if you can't see, you can have the paper copy. I'm good.
Yeah. So, and it's not intended to do anything other than help with the conversation tonight. I think the hope is that this will be a conversation that includes not only the council members, but also department heads with feedback about how the council procedures impact us as well. And we have a total of 6 microphones at the table, so we'll just be passing them around. We feel confident that they have a good battery length in them, so we were working on that. So with that, just to start the conversation, I'm just going to present from up here for just 1 second to move through the slides. This was just some of the background. So there are basically 7 different topics that were coming up. 7 different topics that we were discussing. Changes to the committee structure, conduct of our meetings, public comment, the agenda format, ethics, expectations of staff in the Open Public Meetings Act. Now, these aren't included in any specific order. It was just the way that it came together in the compilation. So to also help the members of the audience, this is not intended in any way, the comments are really just intended to be identifying what the action was that was being requested, and then to generate conversation as we're moving forward. So if you like, we can go in the format of starting with the committee structure comments and discussion.
If somebody's ready to go, you can go. We're going to try to keep this a little less formal than our regular council meetings.
I mean, I could start. So for me, the committee structure, I think if I'm correct, there's only 2 elected officials at this table that have been under any other committee structure than what we've got now. Is that right? Just Mayor Miller and Mr. Walters?
I don't know. I feel like the committee, maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Walters, but I don't feel like the committee structure has changed very much. Yeah, there we go. That's the difference.
Okay. So my letter about the committee of a whole structure is in the packet. Having had time to think about this a little bit more and get feedback from a lot of members of our community, because when you print something, people start talking to you about it, which is very interesting. My whole purpose behind bringing up the committee of the whole structure is because I believe that as a council, we should all strive to have the most amount of equitable access to the firsthand information that's being presented, because I think the 7 of us, as all different council members, hear different things, report different things, and I think we all strive to get everything right perfectly. But I think Councilmember Kalila McGrath showed this perfectly tonight. I gave a committee report that was maybe a little bit light, and she followed up with some things that she had heard that were different. I'm sure Mr. Young heard other things, and there were probably some things that none of the 3 of us heard at all. So I think it's a good opportunity to go forward with a different structure, because we are in a time where I think our public, I know myself as an elected official, it's weird to me that members of the public can go to all the committee meetings, but myself as an elected official can't because of the Open Public Meetings Act. So I had talked a little bit, and I know the mayor sent out an email earlier today from Peter Donovan about the structure that Mount Vernon sort of works. And this is something that I actually, at a couple meetings for AWC, had a conversation with Mayor Donovan about. And he has seen a lot of public engagement and a lot of progress towards positivity around the council by going to that type of structure. So I'd be curious to know if any of you had a chance to read that email and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, apologies on that late send. I guess I could have sent it Friday, but it's kind of goes to the conversation we had at the retreat, where I just did the rough back of the napkin math on, council obviously can choose any way they want, but I'm looking at the staff, the amount of staff that's required for just to staff all the various meetings, and I think the math works out pretty easily that it's less meetings. Obviously, the other way to get rid of meetings is combine some of the council. It's less time. Just doing that math.
I guess too, what I'm kind of curious about, I know it's a radical idea to have all 7 members of council have an equal voice in conversation from the beginning on topics, but I am curious to know what the resistance or to not move to a more open structure for all council members. I'm just, for those that kind of want to stay and support the current path with some minor tweaks but still leave the small committees intact, I'd kind of be curious to hear from you as to why that's a better model.
All right, I took a microphone. I think our goal ought not to be less meeting time, but better discussions and better outcomes, better decisions. So I am unconvinced by the meeting time metric. what I
That's one metric. It was just one.
Sure, yeah. I think that there's certainly an opportunity to improve our current meeting structure of our all council meetings, but also maybe some of the committee meetings. So for example, some committees seem to simply just report out what's happening in the department. Now, I haven't been on all those committees, so I don't necessarily know, but because he's sitting next to me, I'm gonna pick on library. So in the library committee, I assume the committees are not making any kind of recommendations on what books to purchase or what policies to pursue or what hours to open, and that it's mostly just a readout of what's happening in the library. Do we think that that's true? Okay, so assuming that's true, I don't think it's necessary for us to have a library committee. We added it a couple of years ago, and I think maybe the department heads wanted a library committee and a museum committee and some of these other smaller department committees, but I think we would all appreciate, all council members would appreciate receiving all that information directly. And I think that need not be a committee of the whole structure, but simply a regular presentation from the departments, and I think that would go for every department, but it could also mean that we could get rid of some of the committees, like maybe library or museum, or consolidate them. So then we'd be receiving all that information all the time. If we needed to delve into some kind of policy related to that department or activity, we could appoint an ad hoc committee. But otherwise, we could receive the information and do whatever it is we need to in the full council. But then there are some other committees, finance. The information we receive at full council on a quarterly basis for our finance update, critical information, the entire council and the public needs to get that. But somebody also needs to delve in and have a better understanding than you can get in a full council meeting. I think it's critically important that we fully understand the budget, which we don't get from those updates. I mean, they're not necessarily intended to be that level of understanding either. And there's lots of information in my time on finance, I'm not on it anymore, but that I was able to derive and understand and figure out from having a much more in-depth discussion with the finance director and with the other finance committee members. So in summary, I'm okay with changes to the committee structure. I don't think it's going to be good to say we're going to eliminate committees entirely. I don't think that will yield better outcomes, but I definitely think that there's room for some improvement there. And this is a little bit, I think it's in one of the other headings as well, but the committee reports, I don't know that the committee reports are functioning that well. We have asked, starting a couple of years ago, for the idea of having the department heads report out to us, and that is information from the horse's mouth. And it would also allow the entire council to decide, once it receives information from the departments, whether there's a topic that it wants to go send a committee to go work on, maybe an ad hoc committee, maybe a permanent committee. And so I think that there's a lot of value in maybe reducing those reports to writing, making them more detailed, or having the department heads do them, or having the department heads write them up, and then committee members append information to them. There's a lot of possibilities there. But I think our current committee reports, as was pointed out by our facilitator 2-3 retreats ago, have some real negatives. I'm given a report and the next person next to me is writing down notes for their report that they're going to give after, not necessarily listing. I think we can make some improvements there, and that might be a baby step toward an improved structure overall.
Well, I will speak next. I think the first couple of years I was on council, library, museum, and was it HR were all combined, and we would was that it? I'm looking at you. Do you remember? And we would rotate. So essentially, you were there, right, Mr. McDougall? So we would essentially see those departments quarterly instead of monthly, and I think that worked fine. But then there was someone kind of checking in. So those three we broke apart for whatever reason. I don't really know why, maybe there was more going on in HR, and that's kind of why that happened. But I do think that it's, depending upon what the directors say, that would be one where you could combine. Obviously, the IT and fiber makes sense to combine too, as does hacks and planning. I think those are kind of all in those notes. I find the committee reports from the directors on a monthly basis that are sent out to all of us incredibly helpful. I think that I'm looking at you, Chief Harris. I think you do a really nice job of setting those out, and then after a few days later, we have our committee meeting. So it allows everyone to get that information as a full council, but also then you can do a deep dive. We can ask questions at our committee meeting and talk about things. I don't need to have less meetings just to save hours in my day. I think we're serving the public, and I think that we are still very limited in our accessibility for directors. I think that one of the benefits for having smaller committees, one of the big benefits is that it allows each of the directors, hopefully, to have a sounding board to discuss things that aren't necessarily ready for full council or the public, ideas, thoughts, concerns, ask questions, finance especially. You know, I think that we'll get an update twice a month. We'll have questions, and that doesn't necessarily mean that Mr. Hoagland, as great as you are, has the answer to that question at that time, right? Like, those are numbers, those are complicated reports that you're looking at. And by us asking those questions at a committee meeting, it allows you to then have time to find the answer and make sure to include it at a full council report. I have heard anecdotally that, you know, there are some things that when you want to float and have a candid conversation, you may not want to have that candid conversation at a full council for the first time. You don't know how that's going to, I mean, you're looking at me like you agree, which is fine, but I really think that there is benefit from being able to have a conversation, ask questions, and then allow directors to fully form their argument or presentation or thoughts on a topic before it comes to full council. So that, I mean, that's kind of my initial response when you ask me why I still think we should have smaller committees. Does that mean we shouldn't also integrate having more work sessions such as this? Absolutely. I think I don't think we need to have work sessions just so they're on the calendar. If there's nothing to work on, that's fine. We should not do it. But I think there's an opportunity where we make sure that there are topics flowing and concerns that either council has or the mayor has or staff has that we know we need to bring up before it becomes either a contract or some kind of major change for procedure for the city. And those things absolutely can be brought up. So I think we need to have some flexibility with how we manage stuff and how we have discussions at a whole and still have committees that function in a timely manner.
Yeah, and just to try to help move this along, obviously the staff is going to be capturing what you all are saying, and I'm already hearing some agreements about combining some of the committees. So, and again, I appreciate the fact that the council members who are technically part-time are willing to do all these meetings, but the staff is limited in capacity. So that's why I continue to bring that up, and you will hear from some of the staff about being able to communicate, like what Mr. Walter said about hearing it directly from the horse's mouth. And in those confidentiality situations, there hasn't been an issue that I'm aware of where you don't have access directly to a director. I know there are some cities that don't allow that. This is not one of them. But our committee meetings are open to the public. All right, sorry.
Okay. So I agree with some of the things that have been said. Some of the committees could easily be combined, hacks and planning, IT and fiber. And I also agree that our committee reports are flawed. I forget to say things sometimes, and we all could contribute, really. And I think that if it makes sense for the workflow, hearing those more from the directors would be helpful. Then we would all be hearing the same thing as was said from the horse's mouth. I do like the smaller committee meetings due to the informality. Council meetings are very formal, and I think that's appropriate. I do like the idea, I do like how we talk things over at the committee level to see if they are ready for, and ask questions, so that when a department head gets up to give a presentation at council, they're not getting bombarded or asked questions that they're not ready to answer. It helps that process, because if I'm going to ask a question at a planning committee meeting, it's probably a question that a member of the public is going to have too, and that helps better prepare the director, and I think leads to smoothness of process at the actual council meetings. I also appreciate the informality because I feel like it's a great way for council and staff to build relationships, which is a really important part of our job. We have time to like ask about people's families or their vacations, or that human part that is so important to the work that we do, that we have those relationships and we communicate on that level, not just as council staff. And I think that that's been really key to my experience as a council member and why it's been as positive as it has. I think I had something else, but I will jump in later with that when it occurs to me.
And I'll just take a moment to kind of echo what's already been said by a lot of people. I do personally appreciate the smaller meetings. Even though we've all got our phones in our pockets and our emails and our cell phones, I don't always remember to ask somebody a question until I see them in those committee meetings. And it's just like, oh, shoot, I've been meaning to ask you something for the last 3 weeks, and then I forgot. Now here you are, please answer me. And it's definitely easier to have casual conversations where you're just kind of going back and forth with questions that you've heard from the community. I have a constituent who asked me this. I had somebody that I ran into in the grocery store who wants to know about XYZ. It's not all necessarily information that needs to be shared in a bigger public setting like this. It's sometimes just information that you didn't have time to ask for otherwise. In my responses back to feedback on this, I also just am kind of a yes and person. Yeah, let's have work sessions. Let's also figure out a way to do maybe a quarterly committee of the whole where everybody sees who the department heads are. Not every person that's in this audience has been to every single council meeting this month. And I see new faces all the time when I walk around City Hall. So I think that could also give the general public an opportunity to recognize a new face, not necessarily make a new friend, but recognize new faces. I'm just also a big planner. I don't think that there's not an excuse to start planning for what the next year looks like in November. If you know that you're going to have 4 council meetings a month, maybe you say every first or every second is a work session. You just kind of throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You have all of these departments and all of these concerns, and you've got some departments that have philanthropic arms. Maybe the Friends of the Library or the Friends of the Forest want to come talk to us or something and do a presentation. I think that there's a lot of ways that sometimes we forget to make ourselves available. We also just heard last week at public comment that a 2 o'clock or a 4 o'clock public forum for the comp plan isn't doing anybody good if you're working a 9-to-5 job. Sometimes council members, myself included, can't even make a noon meeting because work catches up with us. So if we could find a way to standardize something that's bigger and broader and more informal like this on a regular basis, I think that could go a long way in also developing trust between local government and our community.
I remember what I was going to say. It's about also that our meetings, our committee meetings being open to the public, it's a good opportunity for residents to come and say, hey, I have this question about this crosswalk or lack of, that's very dangerous. And then I think that's easier for some people to come instead of taking up a big chunk of a council meeting or public comment about it, where we can actually have that initial conversation, and then that can be brought forward to the entire council. So I think that that's helpful in that way too. People very often attend the HACS committee meetings, service providers and residents that are not service providers. And we just had a couple people at our Public Works Committee last week, and we've had multiple attendees at our Planning Committee meeting. So it is a good opportunity, and then to interact with them in that more casual format as well, and then bring things forward from there.
Since you were waiting for me, just kidding. You know, quite honestly, all of the points that the council and members and public are making are really great points. I mean, it really is. The ultimate goal is to be more efficient, to make sure we're using the best possible resources to full advantage that we can. I really get that. I think, though, that part of the current structure that I hope we can expand upon, I like knowing why you think the way you are about this issue. And what that benefits me, it gives me a window into why you're looking at a particular issue a certain way. And it helps me sort of see that we're 7 members, all very different. Everybody's got expertise that they work on, you know, that they're passionate about, and trying to figure out how we get there. And then also at the same time trying to inform the public about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we're using the best use of their dollars in these times that we're having right now. And so, you know, for me, I think some committee of the whole is appropriate. And the reason for that is it allows me, I want to be able to ask, let's say, for example, Carolyn. I may say, like, to Carolyn, tell me why you're thinking this is important. Tell me why this is working the way that it is, because you may have a deeper knowledge about something than I do, and I trust that. And so what I'm looking for you is to help enlighten me, because then I can come back and forth with questions about it. Now, there's the Open Public Meetings Act that kind of prevents the 4th person, if it's only 3, from having that discussion, and you can't tell me. And so therefore, when it comes to council, we're already long beyond that. And I just think that what it allows in some cases is 7 brilliant minds to come together in service to this community. And what it really does help is that when the public has questions about something that's taking place, it allows us to be able to answer it as well, or know where to get it. I don't profess to know much about real estate. Well, you know, Christine is a baked-in resource for helping us sort through those things, but I want to be able to just call her and talk about it. You know, I've got additional questions, but I can't do that when we already have 3 members already talking. So that, for me, makes me feel less than informed when I'm trying to talk about an issue or even have ideas. Those of you that know me know that if you really want to make me happy, bring me to a brainstorming session. I'm just loving every bit of it, because I like thinking both in and outside the box. And what it allows a city of our size to be creative rather than locked into one form of thinking. In this case, as we're talking about, committees of the whole, no, I don't think every committee needs to be committee of the whole. I don't. Okay? I think that feeds to the very issues that each of us are talking about. You talked about, everybody's talking about. I don't find that to be very productive. But what would happen if we did have almost a rotating committee of the whole? It can allow us, whether it's the 3 members of finance, and then at some point we have a committee of the whole on finance, and give in all of the reports that we're getting from the department heads and others, It allows us to have an open discussion, and I want to be able to understand, some of the things that I'm not able to. We're moving so fast with so many issues facing a city of our size, economics, tax dollars coming in, department issues, legal cases coming forward. And, there are just times when we, as a body of 7, elected with the administration, elected to make tough decisions, we need to be fully informed. And I don't believe that comes by way of a single memo. I think that what it helps, those reports monthly, is fabulous. They really are. But there are questions that I have. And there are questions I want to understand, because you may understand something very different than I do. And so I think that if we think that you have to choose one or the other, I disagree with that. I think that we can have some committee of the whole, and why not be able to float it quarterly or whatever it is. It allows those open public meetings to take place. It allows the public to be informed. It allows a uniformity of staff and council to be better informed. Honestly, all of the staff in those meetings, smaller meetings, it does create a bit of intimacy where you can ask those questions. But I believe that if we had sort of a rotating system the same way, it doesn't prevent that, because then I don't have to worry as much about the open public meeting asking. I can call the chief or, and find out what's happening on that. And that may be something we want to discuss in meeting, in the committee, or even in council. And I just think that we shouldn't wed ourselves to one way or the other. I think that there's a tangible benefit to hearing the passion that comes out in each of our voices about an issue. Because I respect all of you so much, it gives me deference for deciding on an issue, because without that, I'm only going on what I've been able to deduce myself, and the short 2,000 or 3,000 foot statement that we're getting in council. I don't sometimes believe that is enough. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And because I respect you all and the department heads, I really want to hear what you're thinking, but I can't go beyond the 3-person, because guess what? Everybody's very cognizant of that. We're careful not to go beyond it, and it's a big problem. So in some cases, it's important that we have that open meeting, whether it's rotating or not. It will allow all of us. And if you've got an expertise that you're happy about, lead in. It's okay. Because again, as much as I may love every single issue, there are those I am passionate about.
But, sorry.
I'd
Ms.
just like to make a statement, because I know that we really want to hear from department heads too, and so I'll just kind of put this out there. So in the long time that I've been with the city, I've spent a lot of time with the personnel committee. I've spent a lot of time with the fiber, the IT committee. And I can tell you on one hand the number of times that the public has come to that. So I'm not, those meetings are not drawing a lot of public interest. I can also say that, I think as long as the fiber committee and IT committee has been in place, that the same members have sat on that. Well, I take that back. Mayor Miller sat at, and then Amanda joined. But there hasn't been a change. So there isn't that ability to have those conversations with the other council members. So the idea of perhaps having term limits or having some type of rotation, whether it's your interest or not, might be just a nice way to get to know a little bit more about all of the different departments and divisions.
I'd like to say really quickly, I don't know that I feel strongly either way. I think Ms. Moulton made a really good point, and actually I appreciate Ms. Shu's point about just rotation and having, multiple council members like rotate through each committee, whatever that structure or, number of committees looks like. Ms. Moulton's point, though, about participation and conversation really, I think, is something that I've enjoyed about the committee structure as it currently stands, where, like, when we do public comment during a meeting, it's a one-way piece of conversation. A member of the public makes a comment, and there is no response. And in a committee, if somebody from the public wants to join that meeting and engage in conversation, it is absolutely two-way. It's not often that public members join committee meetings, but when they have, it's very much a conversation. And I think also that, we know that the verbal part of communication is only it's some fraction of the actual communication. There's all sorts of nonverbal communication that's happening. And when we're sitting up in this sort of arc line up there, it's not a conversation per se. It's at least not in the same way that a committee meeting where we're face to face and not always in the same room, but we're looking at each other on the screen at least, and that is conversational in a way that that personally I find valuable, and there's a richness to the communication that is different from the formal setting of the council meeting.
I had a follow-up to Mr. Young's comments. At the risk of asking you to expound, I have heard you say a couple of times that you want to have more conversation. And my concern with switching from more or less the structure that we have now, maybe with some refinements, to a and I'm going to avoid using the term committee of the whole because I'm not sure that we have a common understanding of what that means. So switching to a structure where we don't have those committee meetings and we just have bigger meetings, I'm concerned that our quality of our conversation would only go in one direction, that's downward, because we would be missing all of those committee meeting discussions. And there's not really, in my mind, there's not really anything stopping us now from our full council meetings from having a more detailed conversation. So how does it get better if we delete our committee meetings?
I recognize the point that you're making. I really do. I think, though, that in going to some committee of the whole, what you really still do is it allows us to have conversations face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball. And it's not necessarily every meeting needs to be a committee of the whole or whatever term you want to use on that. I think that the conversations are richer. I sat right here and as I read through all of the comments, the suggestions by Amanda, by Carolyn, by Christine, by you, Ryan, by TJ and others, and what it really gave me was this huge window as to why. And then it made me ponder those positions even more so. I think that it's richer. I think that what we get is more detail. And I'm not saying that they need to be permanently a committee of the whole. I think that's a legal question as to how we do it. But the question for me is that in having a conversation really is what I want to know about, what I'm advocating for. Because when there are issues that I'm concerned about, one example again would be recycling. Well, Ms. Moulton is an avid recycle person. She's I would consider her an expert compared to what I think I understand about it, and I'm pretty good. But I would need to be able to ask those questions of her and get that comment back in order for me to vote the way I want to vote on issues. And I think that there's a richness that comes from that. Now, I do hear the point that you're making, the caveat about it sometimes being less than. I do. I understand that. But I do think, though, that small committees sometimes are important. But I do think that we have to have some committees or some study sessions or whatever we call it, where we get to talk about specific issues regularly and random issues we want to bring up that may not be on the agenda. It allows us to, one, expunge all of the issues we may have about a subject, but I think if we don't do that, part of us still feels like we're missing out, and that we want to be able to convey to our constituents just as well as anyone else about what's happening within the council and how we get there. Sitting up on the dais is not the platform to really get down to the issues, because one, we don't want to make the staff look like they're not doing their job, which they are. We don't want to embarrass anyone, so there's almost a humanistic holdback. But in having meetings like this or roundtable discussions of issues, it really benefits me, not only that, but I believe the public, because they will hear that there was discussion going on about it, and then that allows them to better understand. So when it does come before council for a vote one way or the other, the background is deeper. And so that's my position. So I hear the point that you're making, and I agree with you in part. I really do. But I do think that there are times when committee of the whole, or whatever we want to call it, roundtable discussion is critical and it's important. And I think it should be scheduled, because we don't, at that point, we know we can look forward to bringing up issues at that meeting that may not be something that we've discussed already, and it allows us to put it on the agenda if it's a longer, lengthier discussion that needs to be had.
I just want to, because I went first and now had a wonderful opportunity to hear from all the other council members before we get staff, and I'd just like to kind of speak to some of the points that were brought up. I thought Councilmember Walters made a really good point when you were referencing the budget committee, talking about how the reason we have these small committees is so that when the budget comes forward, there are some experts in the room that can help speak to it. I would like all 7 of us to be experts on the budget before we have to vote and make decisions on it. I think finance is kind of an important committee to have as the whole. Also, we keep talking about the casualness to these meetings, and I think we have already some examples this year and even last year of when we have had work sessions. I think we had one, I think Councilmember Moulton led one around the comp plan that was an open workshop-y discussion. And that was one of the best discussions. I walked out of there feeling like I knew where everyone was coming from. We had our retreat is another example where we've had full group discussions. And I would also say what I'm talking about moving to, and I agree, not all of the committees should be a committee of the whole, but I'm very responsible and take my job as a public servant and being responsible to my constituents extremely important. And maybe I should start hibernating at my house more, but I go out a lot to a lot of different events and I think a lot of us do. And constituents come up and ask us about things, and they're things that have maybe been going on in a committee discussion for a couple months that maybe haven't been read out in detail yet at a committee report level. I think that everything that we discuss in a committee meeting, it might be uncomfortable to have the public there. I certainly feel like when I'm in a private setting, I can have the same conversation that I have in a public setting, because I just believe that's who I am as a person. So I don't have that part. Also, I think committee meetings that are canceled, that's kind of the same as like this structure that they have in Mount Vernon. And by the way, moving to having more open committees, this is not something that we in Anacortes would be the first people to do. We wouldn't even be the first people to do this recently. In fact, I've talked to many members across the state through my work with the AWC that have moved towards a more open structure for all of council members to get information and be able to ask those questions. So this isn't anything new that we would be doing in Anacortes. The way that I kind of saw it was there's a few committees that really are what I would call the money committees, for lack of a better term, or the committees that really have an impact that the public is interested in. I agree. Fiber, not a lot of interest in fiber unless, you're digging up the wrong street. But not that ever happened. But, for instance, public works. I would say that there's a lot of interest. In fact, most of the questions that I get from constituents either revolve around planning, public works, or traffic. Those would be the 3 committees that I think most of our public even if we ask the folks in our room that I've seen here many times, have commented about. Those are the committees that I feel like we all should take part in, because again, we are responsible to our constituents. Each of us are. A couple other things that I heard, I feel like a lot of times in committee meetings, the committees are deciding. They're not making decisions on policy or change, but they are deciding when something is ready to come to council. That is a no? So how do things get to council? Who decides?
I would say that through the director that's attending,
director?
director that's attending that
Okay.
meeting.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would say that that's not the case.
I think that there has been accusations made that at a committee level, things are being stopped, and I think that is inaccurate and untrue.
Okay. I'd also say that having those small committee meetings where you're kind of shaping a little bit of the policy or giving feedback, that does happen though at the committee, right? Feedback? Okay. I feel like the 3 council members, so for instance, I'm on the library committee. Did I have more influence over the process of when we were doing the teen remodel? I feel like there is a little extra influence that's had by members of the committee because they're involved. It's kind of like running a race, right? If something comes to the table and the race starts and 3 of the council members are 2 miles ahead and the rest of us are just kind of getting into the process and then we're asked to vote on it, it just doesn't seem equitable. To me. I also think there's been some bleed over on topics from different committees. Like for instance, the ADU conversation that happened about whether or not we should have ADU plans that come forward. I think that was actually something that started out of the Economic Development Committee, but is that not right? It started out of the Planning Committee? Is that, okay. So planning heard about it, and then I remember, because I watched some of these meetings back over the past couple weeks, but then it was brought up that like, well, maybe the Economic Development Committee should get a presentation on that as well. And I think that was kind of an idea, but I feel like why aren't we as a full council getting that presentation? So I do agree that there is a compromise here, but my hope, and again, I don't think that there's anybody, that any one of us 7 are trying to have undue influence over the process. I also agree. I don't think that I think that committees get a bad rap, but it's also because of the fact that the public is not as involved, and those of us on council aren't as involved in that process. So I would really encourage us to take a look at what Mount Vernon does, and they do it very well, where the planning committee, they have a committee meeting that is a committee of the whole prior to the council meeting. So the committee of the whole about planning happens at 6 o'clock, and then the council meeting starts at 7 o'clock. So I think there is a compromise to find here.
So I'm going to jump in here real quick because since I've asked department heads to be here, by ask, I said you will be here. So I know they have some, because part of this, a lot of this has come out of probably the first retreat as mayor, and it was my 9th mayor council retreat, where council talked about not getting the communication from staff. So that's some of the foundation. So with that, let's have some directors chime in. Sure.
Thank
Okay.
you. So I just want to address a couple of things very quickly. I also think term limits on committees are a good idea because some of us, I have a lot of longevity on public works and planning that doesn't need to continue beyond what it already has. I think that's fair. I think we all need a good, strong working knowledge and to rotate positions on those committees. I would say, as far as answering questions from the public, again, I'm on the Public Works Committee. I get lots of questions about infrastructure, and most of the time I have to go to staff separately and ask. So I think it's almost sounding like the committees have like this total inside track in this knowledge no one else is getting. But literally, we are reporting everything that we remember or take notes on. There aren't any big secret schemes going on, or like, let's see when we can release this to the public and the rest of council. It's like, I don't know a lot of the answers to the public questions myself, and I ask staff, I ask directors, I ask staff. And so that's where I get my information, because again, getting it from other council members is not going to be as helpful as getting it from the staff who are the subject matter experts who are working in that every day. My memory is flawed, so I just wanted to put that out there. And I do love the idea of work sessions, especially around things like when we're doing the comp plan, when we're doing development regulations, and that all needs to be all of us. We do that to a degree, but we could do it more.
Okay, yeah, so just, from my perspective, it looks to me like a kind of a hybrid model makes the most sense. There's a time, the small committee when I'm... Even with this one, okay. Okay. Really thought I had that one. There's the discussion we have with the three-person committee, it's back and forth, it's very informal, we get a lot of direct questions. There is some benefit to that for me. And most months, we have pretty routine report outs. We're talking about, what we're thinking, what stats have been, things like that. But at the same time, when I have a big project coming up, like the two examples I can think of that went very differently was like when we were promoting battalion chiefs year before last, I hit public safety, personnel, and finance to try to get different perspectives, because there's a lot of different thought processes, and I'm trying to get as many questions as possible that I can answer before I come up and present. Because when I'm presenting, it's just a different feel. It's far more formal. When the questions come and I ask, I don't have, say, my assistant chiefs there, or a subject matter expert, or something spread out in front of me to refer to. So you're kind of trying to answer questions, just out of your head, and it's a little stressful. So the thought process isn't always clean. But at the same time, I did not do that with the boat project, and to me it was seemed straightforward. So I only talked to public safety, got to council, and it didn't go swimmingly. So I guess there's a time and a place, and I think Mr. Young had mentioned a regularly scheduled. I can always put something on the agenda and present to council, but at the same time, if I knew that every other month or quarterly or whatever that scheduled thing was, I know I have a council of the whole or a workshop coming up where public safety is supposed to be presenting, then I'm preparing for that. And then I can sit, and it is different. If it would be just to imagine our normal committee, the chief and I are sitting there with the council members, and we're just communicating back and forth. And it's cleaner for me, and I think we can get a lot of work done in that manner. So I would like to see some opportunity to do a whole council presentation at least. So that's my thoughts.
I need a OPMA compliant way to talk to you all in an informal fashion. So group meetings, so we can just have a conversation that's OPMA compliant. We can talk about policy, where something's going, and get your feedback. We can revise it based on that feedback and then come forward to a more formal meeting. That would be helpful to us. I also like the small meetings because at our parks and recreation meetings, I can bring all my managers, and they can talk to you in an informal fashion. You can ask them questions. Things come up that may lead to policy. So both of them have benefit to us, but we do need a route, or I should say, I would like a route to talk to you informally in an OPMA compliant fashion so that we can develop something and bring it back to you for that more formal council presentation.
All right, I prepared a speech. It's only 4 pages, it won't take long. But just background for people in the audience too, I worked at a single city for 23 years. They had a committee structure there. I saw it go from being a functional committee thing to being sued to being basically a committee of the whole period in that 23-year span. And then I was also an elected official in Bothell, where we had absolutely no committees because we had a committee that went and did things that were pretty bad, and there was never, LTAC is a required committee, that was it. of a committee of just the council in that environment. And so I saw kind of how the public would be informed and the directors would inform the city council together about everything. So anyhow, so I wrote this up, so I'll just let it rip here. So 3 branches of government. There's an executive, legislative, and judicial branch. All 3 branches of government have equal footing and hold the responsibility to balance power. The mayor and staff are part of the executive branch. The city council is only the legislative branch when 4 or more council members are present. With less than 4 council members present, receiving direction, advice, or anything other than receiving information from staff should not be done in a committee of 3 or less council members. Public perception is important. City business by design is to occur in the public participation and observation. Where I previously worked, we had committees mostly to get the committee's blessing to go to city council. And like I said, lawsuits occurred. The public was uneasy with committees of council members with staff occurring outside the public observation. Having the committee open to the public to attend was not a well-received answer by the public. I also saw as council members when a committee was created to review development proposals for city surplus property, when it was brought to city council for just a final vote. In both cases, the city council reverted to committees of a whole going forward to alleviate the public's perception that elected officials were providing staff direction without public observation. Access to information. This was a big one in both cities, but especially in Bothell. City council should receive information at the same time and have access to all the same information. This could become a larger issue among councils that don't get along, as well as councils that do. Further, as staff members sharing information in committee and then sharing the same information with other council members is problematic, creating opportunity for the council member to enter into serial meetings. Staff try our best to protect city council members from opportunities to be in violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. Having information shared with all council at the same time would guarantee equal access to information. Last thing, committees of the whole can be part of the council meeting, but ran without Robert's Rules of Order. It can be an open conversation where the chair still presides, but it does not require strict adherence to Robert's rules, allowing for council members to discuss back and forth conversations and legislative branch ability to provide direction before it's time for a council decision. Thank you.
What I hear from several of us may be something along the lines of offering an opportunity for informal discussion among all of us, maybe on a regular basis, maybe at every meeting, maybe at every 3rd meeting. I think that the port does something similar, like they have on their agenda a time where, okay, we've done the business, now let's kick back and hear about the other things that we've been working on, the events that we went to. Maybe that gets moved from the beginning of the meeting, and instead we have a more informal period at the end. The end has the advantage of it's kind of self-limiting because eventually you get tired and want to go home. But I certainly can see the value in that and having the ability to have a more informal chat. If it were at the end of every meeting, it's probably not something that we come down off the bench to do, but they don't do that at the port either, and they manage to have a less formal conversation that way. Especially given our lack of consensus on this, I do think that we should take baby steps rather than wholesale rewrites. And I think, given what we've heard here, I would propose that we pick a couple of those components and draft them, but then also move forward in the presentation with all the other things on all the other slides.
So we do have 6 other topics of conversation, and I mean, just kind of thinking about the timing, maybe you want to talk till like 8:30 or something, and so. I was
going to suggest that too. We don't have to do all of this tonight.
So, you know, I'm not surprised that this first topic, is inspiring a lot of conversation, but maybe some of the other ones will be a little bit shorter than that because maybe there's not as much that is in question. So wondering when you want to transition to the next kind of set of topics.
I just wanted to say one quick thing. Just think about from when we began this conversation to now. And it's been enlightening for me in so many ways, just really relieving in a way that the discussions are all on the table, you know what I mean? And honestly, I feel closer to understanding the views of why. And it makes me, when we're having those conversations, just feel better about, asking the questions that I want to ask. So thank you.
I'm just going to say something really quick. I also have enjoyed hearing all of this. I think that some level of hybrid where we invite directors to come and have an informal discussion on an every third basis, but also still have committees, smaller committees, makes a lot of sense. And I do think that a lot of you have made really good points about having concerns that it's the same members of committees. And to me, that is something that we really do have an opportunity to rotate through. I don't know if we have to have specifically time limits, but I think that there's a way to realize, and maybe it's not, I think there would be a benefit of kind of staggering as folks come off one committee and goes on the next committee and comes on a committee. I think just so that we have that institutional knowledge and perspective. But I do think that there's a real opportunity. I got on finance after 4 years of being on council. I've learned a lot in the last year and a half as a finance committee member. But then the only thing I do want to say is that the 3-person committees with the directors, I'm only on a handful of them, and I think we do good work. I think that everyone who's on those committees has the best of intentions, and I have respect for my fellow council members, and I trust that, yes, they may have more influence because they're hearing about a project sooner or from the infancy, but we've got to delegate. We have to delegate the work to get it done. And so I know that that's just part of working with a larger group, is that we've got to trust each other and bring concerns when we do have concerns, but know that, fellow council members on economic development, I've never been on public works, are doing good work, and if I have questions, I'll go to the public works director. So thank you.
Feel like it's time to move on to the next subject. I think staff took away there's an opportunity to do some sort of hybrid work.
So kind of the next kind of topic that maybe we can transition to is the conduct of meetings. And there are several comments here, and this was that we've just listed, and I know that it is small, but trying to establish who acts as mayor in the absence of the mayor or the mayor pro tem is one question. Formalizing the number of meetings council members may attend remotely. Considering if there should be a limit on a virtual attendance by council and/or the requirement that remote council members keep their camera on during the meeting. I'm only reading these because I think it's difficult to see in the audience. Discussing the number of absences a council member may have, excused or unexcused, and then providing some general reasons for the absence to be excused. So a lot of focus on how we're handling absences or virtual attendance. Replacing the term mayor with chair in most cases, prohibiting any campaigning, adopting some procedures for quasi-judicial matters and entry into an executive session, or when you can enter into an executive session, doing some clarification on the 2-read rule for ordinances, adopting the Roberts Rules of Order, a roll call for all key decisions, and changing the number of council members necessary to add an item to an agenda without mayoral override.
Michelle, there's one more I'm curious about because I feel like we get a lot about it, and that is not that Mr. Franciac doesn't do an amazing job taking the vote, but the vote never moves. It always it eventually moves, but I'll just say it. I always tend to vote last because roll call is the first piece of the vote. And I'm just wondering if we could maybe formalize, if we don't have one already, how we take the vote so that maybe the person, whoever it might be, that's in that first seat isn't always last.
I always like to be last on council, but that was just me.
So hopefully this can just start generate some conversation. Looks like Steve, you might have a question, feedback.
The order of the vote changes as the item goes down the agenda. So you're talking about like perhaps every meeting, then the roll call starts
Correct.
on the next
because
member?
that would then, because most meetings, we don't have 7 things on the agenda to vote on. So
I don't think logistically that's hard
maybe
to do.
even 4 or 5 things. And I just feel, it's a question that I do get from time to time. How come you guys always vote in this same order? And unless there's any objection, I'd be interested in maybe moving the roll call each meeting and then continuing as we normally do. But
We're all looking at Greg, and he'll just make a notch on the desk each time. Is there any objection to that? Do we need to codify that? And okay. I want to comment on the first one, the mayor pro tem. Since I've been all 3 of those, mayor pro tem and council member. Do we need to codify? Traditionally, what we do if neither of them are there, we go back to the previous mayor pro tem to chair the meeting. That's the only time it's been an issue. But if we want to write it down, we can write it down.
I think you might not always have a previous mayor pro tem. I don't know what the rule should be, and I don't think it really matters that much because it almost never happens. There should just be some rule for when it does. It almost happened this past year, right?
It did, and there may be a date coming up in the near future that.
at risk of putting myself in the back seat, what if it just went to the council member who has the longest tenure?
I thought of that, but there could be a tie. So I think we should just make Darcy figure out an option and write it in.
Wonderful.
Let's just try to make sure that we're using the microphones because it is being recorded. Do you want to talk about meetings attendance?
I'll jump in. Sorry. I feel like there should be a limit on virtual attendance. I don't know what that limit should be, and I do think there should be a rule where you kind of have to keep your camera on, only because I do feel like when folks come to talk to city council, they really kind of do want to see us in person. And I think that there was a lot of changes that happened and I wasn't here at the time, but I did follow along, when we moved to COVID, that were necessary and important changes to make sure. And I think from what I could see from that discussion, there was always kind of an intent, like, we weren't going to say, you could be virtual forever on every meeting. So I do think there would be a benefit. And I'm not saying what that limit should be, but I do think that that should be clarified somewhere.
So that was something that was very contingent on my willingness to even run for the seat. The possibility of someone else that works for the Washington State Legislature getting elected to city council is probably slim to nil after I leave, but we've seen another council member as part of the military. We are a pretty young council, which means that our parents are probably aging. What happens if someone needs to go to another state and take care of an aging parent or an aunt or an uncle or a sick kid? There are a lot of things that kind of hold people back from being in person. And I think that ultimately it's a decision of, do you want somebody there or do you want somebody not there? Because with most policy, there is an exception. And I'm sure that if tomorrow my dad falls down and breaks his leg and I need to go back to Texas, I can write a letter to the mayor and say, hey, Mayor Miller, I gotta go. I got stuff I gotta do. I don't know that I can actually make the next month. Can I get permission to miss 4 in a row or something like that? Like that is the one thing that's great about this small town, is that we all recognize each other's humanity and that stuff just comes up. I appreciate personally that there's not a limit. I know that we were talking about something like 12, which is 1 meeting a month remotely. I don't think that it's necessarily a terrible idea, but it is still one barrier that could keep someone really good from running for an elected office. I am also going to jump ahead just real quick to talk about keeping their camera on during the meeting. I personally turn my camera off because I want whoever's giving a presentation, if that little box is open, like, it just feels really creepy to know that everybody's like staring at my face up in the corner. And if my camera's off, that little box can get moved completely away, because if we were doing this remotely, where is that box going to go? On this entire screen of like text. So that's just me being like pragmatic. It's not like I'm petting a cat or doing something cute other than paying attention to what is going on in council. It's just me saying, I'm going to shut my face off so that you can actually look at what's on the screen.
Completely agree with the camera off comment. My inclination was to require cameras to be on, but until we get to a point where we've got some different arrangement with the Zoom and can move that camera away or have a whole different arrangement, I think we should leave that alone. I do think we should have some upper limit on the number of remote participation. I mean, you shouldn't be able to do 52 meetings. 12 I thought made sense, maybe 15, whatever. Just, it shouldn't probably be 6 months. I mean, if you're not able to participate or half the year.
48 meetings is the plan per year.
What's that?
48 meetings is the starting point. Four council meetings a month. Sorry, I'm just,
sure,
yeah.
sure, because the fifth meetings don't
So
generally
if you're
occur.
trying to come up with a number,
Yeah.
work your way back from that number.
So whatever that number, I mean, if it's somewhere around 12, I think I'm comfortable with that. If it were half, I'd still be comfortable, because I don't think anyone's going to reach that level, but there should be some cap.
And that's codified as 3 unexcused meetings that in your procedures. 3 unexcused meetings basically means you're out.
If I could add, again, I remember when my mother was passing, I was going home every other month to spend 2 weeks to help care for her. It was just part of, the love and what I needed to do, all right? And so for me, it was just what it was. We get paid a lot of money here, less than $1 an hour, to do what we do. And, public service is a gift that we give to the communities that we're trying to serve and give the best that we can. So I personally don't think that if we had an abuse of the situation, I think that would lead itself to a further conversation. I do believe the virtual meetings, I think what we already have established is a reasonable number, as you said, Mayor, of 48. I sometimes struggle a little bit being remote with the camera on. I think maybe we could implement where there's a picture up there. Everybody's got your picture from city council up. That's one thing. But every once in a while, you need to take the camera off because, again, I may need to use the, the loo. Okay, thank you. And I need to cut it off, And so I don't think that hurts us yet. It is a reasonable request, but I think that it should be implemented if we have a further problem. And so, but yeah, I really do think that, virtual attendance, yes, and of the 48 meetings, yeah, that's just my view on that.
Yeah, I would say 12 is a reasonable number, quarter. When it comes to the camera being on, I think that there's some work to be done from our audiovisual technical perspective. I've gotten concerns when, yeah, the one person who is remote's face is the full screen far beyond, and now the full council image is tiny, so the public is only seeing the large face and not the rest of the council's interaction. So I think that's also just kind of a technical component of how do we manage if we can do some of those improvements when it comes to recording and all those things. But I also think, I feel like I'm willing to trust the electeds to put their camera on when they need to and turn it off when they need to.
I think sometimes when we're looking at our screens that we can see the face, but what is being shown, like on the YouTube videos and on the later things, are adjusted to be the whole thing.
So, when I was zooming from home, if it's the last person to speak whose face is up there, and nobody wants to look at someone's giant face on giant screens for any kind of extended period of time, it's not comfortable for anyone.
I agree with the camera on thing. We gotta, as much as I do enjoy seeing my face on a giant screen, I definitely do agree that the camera on thing can be a little awkward. And I also think 25% of the meetings, which is 12. But kind of to Anthony and Amanda's point, if a council member were going to have a situation where they could make the meetings, they could come before us as, or not come before us, but we could make an exception, right?
Yeah, we did that. We did absolutely that with a council member who was on military leave. So
Okay, perfect. As long as we have that.
Council approved that.
Because I think that's a really good point.
I think is that working? I think that's a really good point for all of these discussions, is council can always vote to waive a particular rule in a circumstance. So that's always on the table.
Moving on. The next one was my suggestion. In some cases in the rules, I think we mean the mayor, and in some cases we mean the person who is chairing the meeting. So I just suggested that we should distinguish between that because they're not always the same when the mayor pro tem, for example, is chairing the meeting.
Share a question, Ryan, about that. When I read the language mayor with chair, is that sort of a precursor to Robert's Rule of Order, or is it, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, does it change the dynamic of what can be done? You know, like the mayor, you know, sort of facilitates the meeting, you know, make sure that everyone is heard that wants to be heard. Does changing the language to chair change that? And if it does, in what ways?
Well, I am just suggesting that when a rule says, you know, that the chair needs to do this,
right,
that if it means the person who's running the meeting, it should say chair.
Got it.
If it means the mayor, it should say mayor.
No, I agree with you on that.
But I don't think you would see a
I'm
difference
happy. All right,
at the bench.
thank you. Yeah. You see how this conversation is benefiting? We were so right about it.
Did you want to keep going down your list?
And then the next one, we have had this a couple of times recently, and I think we just need to have a rule that there cannot be any use of public facilities for campaigning, either from council members or members of the public. And that's not really reasonably in dispute because it's a state law, but it's probably something we should highlight in our rules.
Just out of
campaigning, I mean, mostly for ballot measures is the type of thing that comes up. Obviously for candidates as well, but it's usually the ballot measure type thing.
I mean, I always took my button off when I came to watch council meetings before I was on council. But is that kind of what you mean? Like any kind of like if someone wears a campaign button, that kind of thing, or?
I actually don't think that would be a problem.
No, that's more to the lines of like me being a little slow when somebody's up there talking about as I'm chairing a meeting, you need to cut them off and explain the rules about, you know, particularly public disclosure that you can't campaign.
And it could be inserted in our public comment guidelines too, so people know up front.
So you want to put that in the council procedures, I guess, is I think. keep rolling if you're going to.
The next one, there's sort of two in one here, but the quasi-judicial matters, I think that there is some script that the mayor has, but it's not in our procedures. And I think it would be useful to, what that script is, copy it into the procedures. And then we have the ability to go into executive session whenever we need to, whether it's for real estate or attorney-client privileged communication. So I think it would be useful to highlight with specificity the allowed options to go into executive session and then how you do it. So that we can make sure that, like, if we need to have a privileged discussion, we can have it. Maybe there's no discussion on those. And then two-read rule. So this one, maybe we will have more discussion. The two-read rule currently is in effect for, I think, ordinances, all ordinances, but there might be some subset of ordinances that don't require it. So for instance, budget amendments, we usually waive that. I brainstormed that maybe ordinances that are regulatory for the public should have a two-read rule, but not maybe all ordinances, because there are several things. I think setting the date for a vacation hearing has to be done by ordinance or something like that. There are some weirdnesses in the statutes that require ordinances at various times that don't really make sense to have a two-read rule about, and instead of waiving it, maybe we could limit the rule.
I would really appreciate clarity around the two-read rule, and I think I never understand, like, the first couple of times that we waived it, there were members of the public that were like, why did you do that? And I was like, So having that clarity would be really helpful to understand when we could do it, because it feels like right now it just is an automatic that we're gonna, most of the times, recently not as much, but in the beginning, that we were just gonna waive it, so.
And seeing no further discussion on that one. And then the next one is adopting Robert's Rules of Order. The previous version of council procedures that we had 2012, 2013 had, I think, an affirmative rejection of Robert's Rules of Order. And when we rewrote the current version, what is more or less the current version, it's been amended a couple of times, we kind of brought the list of motions and things you could do out to an attachment. And I think the idea was to put it on a separate sheet of paper so that eventually we could drown it in the bathtub and just replace it with Robert's Rules of Orders, which is the standard and is more or less what we are following now.
And I remember when we did that, I think that at the time that staff was concerned that we might make errors, but I think that, there are a lot more options out there for training and references.
I agree. I don't have a problem with formalizing Robert's Rules of Order. I do think that we all need a refresher course on what Robert's Rules of Order allows and doesn't allow. And so for those that are a bit more savvy, I've seen Robert's Rules of Order act as a whip. And when you don't really fully understand Robert's Rules of Order, what do you know, right? So I totally agree with you. I'm okay with that as long as we understand it fully and how we're going to apply it uniformly.
Agreed. And I'm almost certain that I will make errors, but we can go ahead and adopt them as far as I'm
Certain
concerned.
that I've made plenty, but I try to read Robert's rules and I try to use them every meeting I'm chairing.
Plug here. Great idea, and I'm totally for it. AWC has a ton of videos and information on their website that you can watch and learn more about Robert's Rules and how it works.
Seen them all, and it still will make mistakes during the meetings.
There's other options too, such as in-house training. Jurassic Parliament has come to other jurisdictions. I don't know if we've done it here. I don't know what our experience with it was here, but it's been positive in other places.
That's a good one.
About to retire, too.
We need to get the video. Jurassic Parliament, great course.
Would help the Planning Commission too, if you do something like that, have our other boards do it. Invite the housing authority and other jurisdictions.
Next one is the change number of council members necessary to add an agenda item. That might have been something that I put in my original letter. I don't think necessarily that we need to change the number, but what I do have a question about is if I hear something, or if any of us hear something in a committee report that we're like, we think that that should be a full council conversation. Is there a mechanism currently in place, and if not, can we formalize one where we can pull that item out of the small committee and bring it to the full council?
Well, again, that's the director, and by council procedures, I'm tasked with creating an agenda, and I do that through the directors.
So just one of us could say like, hey, I think that should really come to the full
Again,
council.
I think that's always been the case. I've
Okay.
always encouraged, even sometimes when I disagreed with council, like you come and, you don't have to have 3 people come to the mayor and say, hey, I want this on the agenda. I'll put it on the agenda. And then maybe if for some reason I disagree with that, then 3 council members take it to the clerk and the clerk puts it on the agenda. That's the rules that are in place.
And you have always done that, so appreciate that. But so it's at the discretion of the mayor then, if it pulls out of the agenda?
The exception of the rule, the way it's written now, where
Okay.
3 council members, if I might.
Maybe we would benefit from some note in the rules that 1 or 2 council members can request that an item from a committee be brought without prescribing a whole lot of process around it, but just make it clear that if council wants to elevate something from a committee to the full council, there's a way to do it.
So currently, the rule says that 2 council members, by submitting a written request to Steve, can add an item to a council agenda. Now, the mayor can decline to do that, but that's when the 3 council members kick in. But so, I mean, I think the way we've seen that happen in the past is just like an email, right?
But I think what TJ is asking for is something different from that, because we've used that procedure a lot, right, for something we knew we wanted to do. But what if you don't know that you want to do it because you've never heard about this before? So maybe it's a less formal thing than that.
Like
Leave that
during
alone.
During the council or the committee report saying, oh, hey, I want that. Gotcha.
It always helps me to put an example. So for instance, the ADU thing that kind of came up, right? I still would like to hear a little bit more about that. So is there a mechanism for me to say, hey, I'm interested in hearing all about this, talking about this? So yes, when it comes up in a committee report, if there would be a mechanism to kind of elevate that.
You also want to talk about the roll call for key decisions. I think that was a comment you had made.
If we're considering moving around the the attendance vote, then I'm okay with moving on from that one.
Just a quick, question about, asking you, TJ, to elaborate a little bit more. I thought, I guess, with having the 2 council members send a written request to Mr. Hoagland, does that suffice the issue to make sure that it comes on? Because I think, because, the mayor is saying, just reach out to him or her, whoever the mayor is, might be coming in, we don't know. But, does that suffice what you were originally bringing up?
It could. I don't want to get too in the weeds of changing kind of what's already in there to get things onto the agenda. I just feel like there are things that come up that it's like, boy, I would like to, and yes, I could go to the staff member and have a conversation, but I'd also like to hear from the other council members where they're at.
It seems like a really good opportunity when we are having our work sessions, right? That's like to be able to say, hey, I'd love to hear more about this at a work session. Does that sound okay? I also think, though, that opens up another point, whereas there have been times where council has requested more information or asked a question at a council meeting and it doesn't necessarily get written down and brought back with an answer. And I don't know if that would be Greg over there who would take those notes, but I think that kind of goes in line with, hey, do we have some way of knowing who is going to write down a question and have a follow-up response? I think that would be really helpful.
So in the way that this has kind of been broken down, there's 7 different topics, and we're kind of like looking at 2 and maybe have another 45 minutes. Is this something that you want to push through and try and get through everything tonight, or would you be willing to do this type of format, for follow-up conversation? And I ask that also knowing that we're going into CFP and budget and just a busy time. Maybe it's a good way to start a sample.
I'm good till 2 a.m. I kid. No, I think it's good practice for us to have these type of conversations for building relationships and that kind of thing as well. So I'd be okay if we pushed on some of the topics to further meeting.
And Steve, microphone, help him out.
So did we come to a conclusion on this last item? I'm a little confused now where we landed on. Okay.
Okay, so then public comment, ready to move on to that discussion item? I think there's some interesting. Oh, sorry. Damn, what page am I on? Dang it, page. Go ahead, Emily.
When you look at this, you'll find that there's some overlap from some of the other conversations that we've had. So that might help to facilitate that conversation as well. Some of this, the last kind of bullet area about modifying the consent agenda language to comply with the current RCW, and identifying maybe some other areas that could be included on the consent agenda. This was through discussion with department heads about some suggestions. And so, Darcy, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, thank you. This one was actually recommendation from the legal department that came from the contract specialist. And she's the one that puts a lot of things on the council agendas. And I think you guys have noticed recently that there's been a number of no cost time extension modifications to interlocals, and they're not subject to the consent agenda in the rules. And so we made some recommendations based on, however many years now of putting contracts on the agenda, of some things that get pushed to other business but really seem like they could be on the consent agenda. So the ones that, I'm trying to go to my section here that talks about that. Oh yeah. So updating the consent agenda section that would allow for public works contracts, not just specifically those that have been publicly bid for less than $200,000. There's a lot of public works contracts that aren't formally bid that really ought to be on the consent agenda that don't need a full presentation. We also recommended that contracts that right now, the way the provision reads, it says that purchased or personal service contracts on standard city forms of less than $100,000. Most of the consultant contracts that we have are on their templates, which we then negotiate with them. So I guess we're asking for a little bit of sort of trust in staff that we're going to make sure that the negotiated contracts are acceptable. But it seems like a sort of an arbitrary distinction from our standpoint that it has to be on a standard city form. So that was one recommendation. And then just some clarification for, contracts for goods, materials, and supplies that are not connected to a public works project. Those aren't eligible for the consent agenda, probably should be. contract modifications, some interlocal agreements, and amendments to interlocal agreements. So I think we're looking for some, maybe if council's inclined to consider changes to those items, maybe some guidance on what the threshold is for interlocal agreements. I mean, anytime we contract with another agency, it's an interlocal agreement and it's required to go to council, but like we have some that are, you know, for example, in the public safety realm that are pretty routine and happen on a pretty regular basis and are low dollar amounts. And so does council feel like you need a full presentation from staff on all of those contracts, or, you know, are some of those, you know, would you be comfortable with those being on the consent agenda?
I have no issue with your proposed changes A and B, those first two that you mentioned. The third one, though, C, you didn't propose a lot of definition to, so I think we need to brainstorm some of that. The first two, like when we put the language in that you had to be putting contracts on standard city forms on the consent agenda, there weren't any standard city forms. So it was kind of a mandatory thing back then to push staff toward using them. But for interlocal agreements, there are really significant ones and there are really minor ones. So we got to have some additional threshold, I would think. You know, no cost time extensions, I think, of anything could be one of those categories. Maybe some dollar limit or something like that. But sometimes interlocal agreements may have no dollar associated with them, just giant, endless commitments of effort or staff. So need to be careful about that, I think, in some way. And then contract modifications as well, same type of issue. There might be cheap ones that are, you know, less than 10% of the original value or something like that. I don't know. So long as they don't dramatically expand the scope. And I think language that could be a little vague could be okay here.
For those of you that don't know me, I am highly observant. I love sort of watching faces. Even when I'm on the dais, I'm watching the faces to sort of see the reaction. And forgive me, my fellow council member, Christine, you've had this face going on, and I loved it. So I wanted you to elaborate what you were thinking about it, if it's okay. That's not a tip. Okay, all right, good. Okay, good. No, you know, because
Blank slate.
no, you know, it just recognizing. That's why I was curious to hear what Ryan had to say about it. I'm totally okay with that, you know. But I was just curious. I saw your face, and I was saying, "Wow, let me listen in."
I was getting hungry. I was wishing I had brought snacks.
If it's helpful on this one, we can propose some more definite limits. I think, Mr. Walters, the you know, kind of the concepts you articulated there, that's helpful. We can also look at some you know, some numbers. How many interlocal agreements are we doing every year? You know, what kind of some of the dollar buckets are that they fall into, and we can come back with some more details and maybe a more finite recommendation on those. So.
I think we kind of skipped over the prior bullet on the slide, which was the agenda memo and format requirements, and that becomes even more important as we move things to the consent agenda. I mean, when I started here, we didn't get a copy of the contract, and there was no place to go to get a copy of the contract like our documents portal that we have now. And we didn't have agenda cover sheets. Hell, I think it was just a title on a sheet someplace that is what we approved? I don't know. But we have come a long way. I think that there's still a long way to go on some of the agenda memo, the cover sheets for these items. With contracts, I think we have a little bit more structure than we do on some of the other items. But what I was trying to get at with this suggestion is that we have very clear articulation of what it is we expect to get from staff for an agenda item, and not just for the consent agenda, but for any agenda item, because sometimes we get some detailed stuff, sometimes, maybe rarely, we get too much, sometimes we get nothing. And I don't think an item should be eligible to go on the agenda if we get nothing. But now would be our chance, to think that through, and maybe it requires an offline session for us just to sit individually and critique a couple cover sheets and send in suggestions to Darcy or something. But being able to reduce that to writing and put it in our procedures, I think now's the best time for us to do that.
I also think, based on council feedback over the last, I'm going to say 2 years, that those have just improved in general. So I think we're in a good place, but formalizing that probably wouldn't be the worst thing.
Having that, I'm going to use the word hyperlink to the previous times it's been in the packet is really helpful, just to have the historical context. So good job to all of you guys who have been doing that.
So So the next item that we're going to discuss is public comment, and you can see there's again a lot of suggestions about things that we could to do to just make it more clear to the public, and also ensure that we're providing an environment that is appropriate as it relates to city business or City of Anacortes business. I mean, to City of Anacortes business. So maybe we can just kind of run through these, and if you are the council member that brought this idea forward, or if it's a staff thing, let's just kind of step in and kind of work through this.
Might have been the one who suggested the first bullet. I think I saw some other council members' comments though too. I think currently we ask people to identify the city. We used to do address, but that can create some privacy concerns. However, sometimes people tell us their city, which is where their closest post office is, but they do not live within the jurisdiction. And it might be useful to be able to tease out who actually is a constituent versus who isn't. I don't know how we do that, frankly. And I'm not sure if MRSC's got some guidance on that, but I think it would be useful for us to know, are you actually a resident of the City of Anacortes, or do you have an Anacortes address and you live on Decatur, or whatever?
Well, and it also helped if there was a concern or a complaint, a neighborhood issue, that when we knew the address, some of our ward representatives could then follow up.
Maybe we could ask what ward you live in. Although that would be
With
an
a
interesting
map.
geography test for people.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
We have wards?
The second item, we revised our rules last year, I think, in response to the Zoom bombing, but I had seen a slightly different formulation of the rule that MRSC was recommending. So I actually don't recall it precisely what our rule is now. It's something like you have to limit your comment to matters within city jurisdiction, but there is
related to city
related to city business. So within city jurisdiction or within council's authority, I think is what MRSC was recommending. So my suggestion here is that we more closely tailor it to MRSC's recommendation.
Yeah, the language in here, to matters specifically pertaining to the City of Anacortes, is how we changed it. You all changed it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my suggestion, I guess, mostly is that, I guess, Darcy look at that and see which language is a little better than others. And if our language is good, I would leave it alone. But if MRSC's example is better, then I would suggest changing it.
And again, sometimes it's only as good as the chair's judgment on when he cuts that off.
And as a future meeting chair, I would like as much guidance as possible.
It's helpful.
My next bullet, we don't allow applause, but then we invite applause when we're doing swearing-ins, and so it'd be nice to customize that rule to have it apply to both.
I don't see any disagreement.
does, especially when you're swearing in officers or giving accolades for people for the work that they've done, you know, it's just so important for that wholehearted support. So I think, you know, to the point that you're making, I think that there are cases where it's absolutely appropriate because it really does build for the hold. And so I just find this warm and fuzzy and feels good.
The next one up was formalize online participation requirements. I like the option. I don't think that we should eliminate remote testimony altogether because I think there is some, you know, there's some people that can't get here or that might be out of town for a particular topic that they're really passionate about, but they want to comment. I do, however, think we should possibly entertain requiring their video to be on because similarly to some of us who have customer service jobs, people tend to be a lot more informative and I don't know, have better behavior overall when you see them face to face, even on video, versus when you're just listening to them. So I feel like that could be a really good change to make.
I'm going to agree with that wholeheartedly. It's a requirement at the state that remote testimony be done with your camera on. They have rules specifically about like no campaigning and no suggestive stuff behind you. Like if if you are a union member, don't have an SEIU banner up behind you, but you can have like an SEIU button on or something like that. So not to make it to have your words support your views, not the environment in which you're in. I've also seen, I did a little bit of look at what other cities are doing, and Oak Harbor requires people to register ahead of time, SeaTac requires people to register ahead of time, and SQUIM requires people to register ahead of time. One thing that SeaTac does that's really cool too is that they have a field specifically for name pronunciation, which I think would be absolutely fantastic.
Be great.
Yeah, and they also like lay out what's required and what people can actually expect. One of the things that's not on our list that I've seen in a couple of other cities is group participation and or putting a time limit on public comment on the whole. There's another city that says that public comment is limited to 30 minutes total. So if you have 12 people that have signed up, then you're going to adjust the amount of time that each speaker has. And it's got rules on a couple of these different websites that basically say if you're signing up online and you go over, we're just going to cut you off. So I think it is pretty standardized that people register online ahead of time for online stuff. And yeah, that keeping your camera on, I think, is also going to prevent any bad actors.
Real quick question at the state level. I think this is, you know, cameras are so ubiquitous now, it's probably not really a concern, but is there an exception for if somebody's camera broke or anything, or is it just kind of, sorry?
Not for remote testimony. Well, there's also a difference at the state between public comment and remote testimony. And at the state, there is only remote testimony. So if your camera has broken, then there's actually like somebody in the committee that's on the phone with you, and they will work with you to like, oh, go to your nearest library and try to sit in front of a public camera or something like that. Or they will just take your testimony and put it in writing and submit it that way. But there's, outside of having an individual meeting with the legislator, if it's public testimony, your camera has to be on.
Great, okay. Yeah, and I'm in agreement with the camera on. So just looking for, you know, a way to work around like the corner case kind of thing. So thanks.
So my concern would be less about someone having a camera and more of a challenge just pre-registering. And I don't want to make it more difficult for someone to make a comment than it needs to be. So my initial inclination, unless we feel like we have the technical abilities to make it really easy to pre-register, my inclination would just say, hey, we need your camera on for your comments, but leave it at that at this point in time.
I tend to think that pre-registration is kind of a key component to prevent Zoom bombing like we experienced, but But also, nobody uses this anymore. Like, when was the last time we had remote public testimony? We have in person all the time. I mean, I can think of one, and that was like on the 12th and Commercial Roundabout, back when it was round. So I think it's been quite a while since we've actually had anybody participate remotely. And I'm wondering how much time we need to spend on figuring out
But
how to participate that
to
way.
that point, for me, that would indicate there's not a problem. It's not something we need to solve at this moment. You know, I'm kind of like Christine in the sense of I hear the point that you're making, but until we have a problem, I think we're small enough, nimble enough to be able to make those adjustments. You know, just like we had that Zoom bombing, you know, where the person came in and said all kinds of terrible stuff. But I don't foresee that as a problem. I do like the idea of registering. I do. But I don't foresee us coming up with an absolute solution right now for that. I think we got bigger fish to fry right about now. And if at any point we have an issue, then we can bring in and make those changes.
Just a technical point on that one. This is outside of the council procedures, but if we're going to be having those sorts of instructions for people that are online, we should probably have a better web interface explaining to people the rules for public participation online. As it is, it's a little clunky participating through our website. So probably room for improvement there.
I agree with that technical point, and probably also whatever rule we adopt, we should have the Planning Commission follow suit so that people are used to it and can have the same expectation. But we have had the problem, though, right? Like the Zoom bombing, letting somebody else in a different state take over our meeting, that was a problem. So there's really nothing to say that that won't happen again. And, you know, we have our rule that says you got to be talking about the city of Anacortes, but it is also relatively easy to invent some connection to the city of Anacortes. So that is why I'm pretty heavily in favor of the pre-registration, which is not a panacea, but I think it will help.
And the technology to cut them off. Yeah.
But I think the camera on and identifying the city is a step in the, if the council doesn't want to go with pre-registration, I think that's a good intermediate step.
Didn't you pre-register under a fake name and still bomb?
Yeah,
So-
none of these things can stop it.
Right, but I feel like the camera being on is fine for now, based on all the other complications of pre-registration and potentially being a barrier.
I agree.
And again, that tool didn't even exist. As chair, didn't have that tool of it has to be pertaining to council. So I really, at that one, I had to let it go by rule. But then, unless it was disruptive, which ultimately determined it was disruptive. And
I agree with Ms. Moulton that bad actors are going to be bad actors. They're going to find their way on there, whether they're pre-registering or not. But I would hate for somebody to lose out on an opportunity to comment. I would hate to put another, even though it seems silly to us that, yeah, it's easy to go register. I can think of times where I haven't registered for certain things because I'm like, I don't have time to do that. I'd hate to put another barrier in front of someone to comment.
Well, and another option could be to allow for people to send pre-recorded comments. Because I do worry more than a little bit that requiring people to have their camera on could introduce a whole new method of Zoom bombing that we are not going to have a good way of stopping. I mean, it's not a problem until all of a sudden it's a problem. So.
what? One more? Oh.
The provide limited ability for council to respond to public comment. So that one makes me a little bit nervous because, like, as a council, like, do we each, all 7 of us, get to respond to what our opinion? I think requiring, if like someone asks a question, that we require that someone, and mostly the mayor does this already, but to put it in, require that they follow up with an answer. I think that's something that we should do, and we could tell them that if they ask the question, like, hey, someone's going to get back to you.
Yeah, it's really difficult not to engage, but every MRC, every you do not want to get in that for all sorts of thousands of reasons, but requiring an answer, I think, is very reasonable requirement.
Sometimes people ask a yes or no question, and we all kind of sit there looking at them. So, I mean,
Again, that's a tough one.
I do think that, though, that there are moments when someone is so egregious, so outlandish, just so repulsive about what they've decided that they can come. Well, no, because, you know, I've heard some people say some terrible things, and you have not said a single thing. And I just found that this was gross, and that I think for public record, it leaves it sort of leaves the impression that some of it's true. And I don't think that should be willy-nilly. But, you know, I've had some people to say some outlandish things, and I just could not allow the record to be recorded without a rebuttal for the moment. And I think that those cases are important because there are people who will use that as a tool to advocate whatever messaging they're trying to do. So I do think that there are some exceptions, and, you know, those of you may, you know, I've had one time, but it was outlandish, and I just could not allow the record to remain the way that it was because it had nothing to do with the truth. And I think sometimes when someone comes up to make those statements, there are exceptions.
So this was my suggestion because occasionally people will show up, they will have questions, or they will assert things that are false. We know to be incorrect. And they may not know that they are incorrect, but, you know, when they're just here for one-way public comment, they make their statement and then we move on to other things, and it's a missed opportunity for us to correct the record, help out the public commenter. And so I thought that a rule here could be that we do not respond to public comments during public comment, but a council member or a council member and the mayor, or, you know, can provide a quick clarification in response to the public comments. And I think some additional guidance is required here, you know, without mentioning the commenter, without directing comments at the commenter, but just correcting the record. I think that is a pretty useful and kind of essential thing for us to have in our toolbox in those circumstances where something like that happens.
Yeah, I would just say, how essential is it for timing-wise? You know, can it wait a week? That's just something to think about.
And I don't think it can wait a week. I mean, I think it's important to respond afterward, but in the same meeting.
I think when you have someone to come up whose deliberate intent is to harm, to hurt, to say terrible things, I think at that moment is the moment you must respond, when it's so outlandish, because we also have to send the message to the public and the individuals that that type of behavior will not be allowed in council chamber. You can have your opinion, you can make your statement, you can do almost anything, but there's a line of decency and a norm in a society such as ours that we cannot allow those people who seek to maim and deliberately hurt and to deliberately lie. And when you know that and it reaches that level, no, you know, again, unless we have some rules where there's a penalty, you cannot allow it, because that's where I think we erode the beauty of what we have as a society and a community here.
I think there's also some very strong comfort in knowing that it's public comment, full stop, that you're not going to be standing at a dais having 7 people and 1 mayor and staff just staring at you while you state your case for 3 minutes. We are always concerned about the exception, which is the tail 3% of a beautiful 85% bell curve where most people just want to come up and say their piece. They're concerned about speeding in their neighborhood. But when there are let me say this personally, as an introvert, even just this is uncomfortable for me. But if I wanted to come speak up at the dais and there was a chance that my emotion or whatever reason brought me to council in front of a bunch of people, if it was possible that anybody could say something back to me, I may not show up. And my voice may not be heard on camera and possibly reported by the newspaper. People send in public comment to us by email all the time. That's absolutely fantastic. But, you know, sometimes it's in the agenda, but who looks at the agenda? You know, I mean, like there's 20 people in town that are always reading the agendas, that are always watching the YouTube. If you've got somebody, though, that has enough passion to show up and say their piece, they should be able to say it safely until they get lousy and rude and racist and just gnarly. But that's also the opportunity to where the chair of the meeting just shuts it down as soon as possible. I don't know that we necessarily need to put any new rules and restrictions about it, but there was somebody that came in and they just had a question. And Matt, you do a good job of telling people, I know exactly what staffer needs to talk to you. They don't know, and maybe 5:30 in the afternoon was the only time that they had because they're working during the day and they can't walk into the building and go to the parks department because that's the first office that they see and then get shoved around, you know? I mean, we want to make this as safe and as comfortable for the public as much as we want to protect ourselves and the other members of the public.
I think that is a point extremely well taken. Members of our public come to comment not to be right, but to be heard. And I do think that there is, you know, I think you can always reach out to them, and maybe we need to require like that they put an email address or a contact or something so that somebody can reach out to them and talk to them about it, you know, kind of help to teach them a little bit about what they have wrong. But I think doing it publicly, even when we're not necessarily saying their name or who they are, I do think that could have worse consequences.
I think Amanda's point is well taken as well. However, I do think people who come to public comment expect more from what they are getting, because, you know, so I'm going to separate myself a little bit from Anthony's hypothetical. My hypothetical is where somebody comes up, you know, they say something that is technically incorrect. They may have a suggestion or a question or a comment. Because they're not providing email, because I think that's a good suggestion as well, that we collect email addresses so we can respond or engage. You know, I think they're frequently looking for a response, and we can't provide that all the time, but sometimes we can, or sometimes we have an insight. And I just think it should be explicitly recognized in our rules that sometimes we can do that, not that we should be doing it all the time. And, you know, maybe we just, everybody but Anthony is enabled to do it, you know, or, but it seems like there's probably some happy medium here. I mean, I think we have really made it a lot more comfortable for people to provide public comment in the last 12 years, but I don't think we should handicap ourselves from being a little bit, I don't want to say interactive, because I don't think we need to get into any back and forth. I mean, that's against all the MRSC recommendations.
That's what worries me with this discussion, especially even correcting the record. Yeah, we're all used to talking in front of people because it's kind of part of our job. But somebody coming up here and then you're correcting the record, you may be completely right, Ryan, that, hey, technically they're wrong and I need to correct them there. You know what? That's going to stifle that free flow of information, and I'm kind of uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, and there's the correcting the record. There is also responding or providing information. I mean, there's a couple different things that can be done there, and it should all, I think, be done gently. So again, you know, not Anthony, but I think there's some role here. I don't know quite how to thread the needle, but I think there's something that we ought to probably do.
But last point about that is I totally agree with you, and I hear the point that you're making. The only statement I'm making is that sometimes there are moments where you have to take that moment to make it a teachable moment about what the norms are in this chamber, what the rules are, that we're not going to allow a denigration at that level. We're just not. And, you know, again, personally, I've had, you know, some people come up to me and say some ungodly things. And, you know, I sat there and I listened to them. And then once they had gotten almost through or through long enough for me, I stopped them and I told them, please do not ever approach me in this manner again. I have always listened to all points of view and will do that. But I do not deserve this, and nor will I allow it. And so my only caveat is when people cross that line of egregiousness, that we allow it. Not for the, you know, idiosyncrasies of minor points that are not necessarily.
And I think maybe even one thing that we could do is to have all the department heads' business cards that, you know, Greg has available, and we could just say, you know, here, contact this person tomorrow. Here's the right person that can help you, rather than have that engagement. Because I don't think, I mean, we have very full schedules that we're trying to work through. Then there's a lot of other things that are going on at the meetings, and that may not be the best use of people's time.
And Anthony, I think you might be talking about rules violations, like explicit rules violations, in which case the chair can just cut them off. But absent a rules violation, it's not really appropriate to say, you know, we don't like the content of your comment.
Agreement with you about it. It's not that I don't like the comment, but when it becomes a personal attack, when it reaches a level beyond having an opinion about a policy, strategy, ideas, that's very different. And that's when, you know, at that point, you cannot allow someone to feel the ability to just be able to denigrate a public elected official in such a manner. It's not that you disagree. It's just the fact that when you run them down and say terrible things, I just think that there's a rule.
Yeah, there's rules, I think in our council procedures as well as Robert's rules that don't allow that on top of the fact that we don't allow disruptions of the meetings, things like that.
So I would make the recommendation that we kind of continue working through the topic as it relates to public comment, and then maybe kind of wrap it up for tonight with the understanding that we'll come back another time. I think that this is really good discussion that's happening. I'd love to hear more from department heads, you know, as well.
One public comment thing we didn't get to, oh, there's more, yeah. The PowerPoint presentations, I wanted to get to hear council.
Well, I do like Ms. Shu's suggestion. You know, there are those situations where a commenter basically, you know, poses generally a question or has said something where it feels to them like they're talking into a bit of a black hole. And if we have just a very standard response that everybody gets, like, here's the business card of the person that basically to work through that issue so that you're not getting the black hole kind of feeling.
Sorry, I'm harking back over wonderful memories of being on a council. Yeah, I would recommend you don't engage at all. It's kind of their time that you give a part of your meeting for them to have their 3 minutes at the mic. If they start asking questions, they learn pretty quickly you can't answer. And that only probably happens one time. They're like, oh, that's not the venue for that. It's more of a, and then I think it's great. Yeah, give them, the chair could redirect them and say like, hey, we're all, well, most of us are here. So we could get, you know, even if they're at the dais, get down and talk to them. Like there's no problem with that. I think disrupting the rhythm of the meeting is probably more of a concern to me. And then I've seen chairs that, you don't want them responding to the public comment, or some of you didn't, you know. And then when somebody's being personally attacked, that is not a good time for you on camera to fire back, because you really want to think through it's not really part of the meeting, you know? It was just their 3 minutes, they had whatever they were gonna say. We let them say whatever they wanted, and boy, we got some crazy stuff, but when they were done, and they sat back down, and that's all for the public comment period.
I totally get that, and I'm not disagreeing because I totally agree with you, and I respect that. I've had racist comments from people who thought that I was uneducated, had no ability to articulate the moment, and felt that in a public setting they had the privilege to be able to come up and say that. That I categorically reject. I don't have to elaborate. I just am not going to allow it. And I think as a body of people, there is a line we cannot allow them to cross, because that line will never stay constant. And so particularly in today's time, that there are moments where we do have to raise our voice. Not all the time, very rarely, really. But I'm just simply saying I cannot allow it, because I think what it forces is people, it codifies the viewpoint, and it encourages others. And so once that line, that small line, not any of the other stuff that you're talking about, because I totally agree with you, I just can't allow it because it sort of misinterprets.
Yeah.
Okay,
One more time. No person, disruptions under Chapter 8, no person may engage in oh, that's a great word, indecorous, abusive, or inappropriate language. Indecorous. I got to look that one up. Make personal attacks on any other person, impugn the integrity, honesty, or motives of any person, in any way make slanderous remarks, wave signs, cheer, applaud, or disruptive action as one part of that.
So I know we only have a couple minutes, but there's one more on here that I really was hoping to.
Before you move on, I would request that maybe Darcy take a look at the language that Matt just read, because I'm not confident it's constitutional. Yeah.
I'm always very reluctant to cut folks off, even when I don't like what they say, because that puts us quite a bit of liability.
The other part, sorry, Gene. The other part of public comment that I wanted to hit on was limit the use of presentations during public comment. I think this one is super important for a couple of reasons. One, the people who give presentations to us as a council are the staff. And there have been a couple times where somebody's been like, well, who is that new person that works for the city? I'm like, no. I know they were giving a presentation, but that was a public comment, not a presentation. So I feel like what we can say is, if you have material that you want to walk the council through, you can absolutely hand it to them and walk them through it. But displaying it publicly as kind of like, this is a presentation of fact, I think leads to problems.
Also interrupts the flow of the meeting, because nobody knows how to use PowerPoint. You know, so it's always like, well, let me wait for several minutes while I find the start presentation button.
And it's also, putting in a USB flash drive into city computers. I think that's kind of, to me, the most neutral way of handling it. But I agree that when you add the visual component to a public comment, it gives it a lot more weight. So I would be inclined to just not allow that. Hand out paper copies, fine, but nothing that's going to be on the screens. Yep, absolutely.
One of the items, since now we're going in reverse order through the bullets, one of the items I suggested was, we have a succinct list of public comment rules that we could post at the door, hand out, put on the podium or whatever, but that could always clarify that the commenter is addressing the council, it's not addressing the audience, it's not addressing the person who spoke last, it's not addressing an individual member of council, you're supposed to address the council. And then Matt does this now, but the articulated rule could be that, and then the chair could say, hey, address the council.
Help us to, staff is looking for some help about describing how public comments are documented in the meeting minutes, needing a little bit more clarification.
MRSC, I think this was mine as well. MRSC has some guidance on that. They say do not document the public comments. You know, say, so-and-so made a public comment about 3-word topic. Not like here were there 11 bullet points or that kind of thing. I don't think it's a legal matter, no. It's just a best, I think it actually came from Jurassic Parliament. The day after the deadline that I was supposed to send you comments on this, I sent you you were on vacation, Emily, but I sent to all 3 of you a link to MRSC's public comment guidelines. There's like 130 of them, so pick and choose.
That clarification, I think that helps us to kind of understand and makes more context for that note there. Is there anything else under public comment here that we'd like to discuss? I appreciate we've spent a couple hours doing this tonight, and there's lots more to go.
Amanda mentioned a total time of 30 minutes. I just want to plug for that.
A total time for public comment, sure. Oh, yeah, I was going to say something else, so, but, I mean, if we're doing a comp plan update or development regulations, if we have 10 people at 3 minutes, maybe we shorten it to 2 minutes each.
Keep in mind, there are also designated public hearings for those. So yeah, just some upper limit on the total amount of public comment time, I think is what.
How many times have we gone over a half an hour at public comment?
Well,
because I can only think of
in the bad old days, perhaps, yes.
Yeah.
Recently, not as much, but in the past,
and
yes.
Sure, but I also go back to, again, it's kind of part of our job to allow everybody that wants to comment to comment.
But it's part of the chair's job to run an efficient meeting that doesn't waste everyone's time. And so you, as chair, you have to say, if you're going to say the same thing as the previous, you can just get up to the microphone, get your name on the record and say, I support this, don't support this, or, you know, I'm on board.
Thing that I read in another sitting, I don't remember who it was, but if you're a person who is speaking on behalf of a group being defined as 4 people or more, then as that person is speaking, the chair will say something about how many people in the audience also echo this, raise your hand, and you're only allowed to raise your hand, no cheering or anything like that. So that could still count as a group of people coming in and expressing their support multiple times.
But I think it's valuable to establish an expectation, but not sure if I heard a majority of council say they would like the expectation of 30-minute total time.
I mean, I remember the days when they were really long comments, but I'm less inclined to put that maximum on it at this point, just because I think we see a lot of folks be nervous, kind of, this is not their comfort zone, and prepare a written statement that they read aloud. And I've seen a lot of them really try to keep it within the 3 minutes. And I think out of a level of respect, I don't want to take that opportunity away from them just because there's 12 people signed up until it becomes more of an issue.
Also agree with that.
All right, that sounds clear. I think that wrapped up the public comment portion. Okay.
Just as kind of there are some other things coming up. Are we planning to do this again in like a couple weeks or like, I know this has been so riveting for everyone, but it also has been very helpful. So.
And do you want it in this format as well?
I like this format.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll see where we can jam it in. Again, ultimately, the staff is going to put together all the comments and put it in the council procedures for a formal vote.
And just kind of as a point of information, we can always change our council procedures should we make a change that we then determine is not working.
Yep.
It's a fluid document.
One more? Okay. All right, so with that, I'll adjourn the council meeting of September 8th. Have a good night.